And on August 3rd, Israel hit the 7th shelter. Ban Ki-moon was in an untenable situation, and he finally said what Israel did was, quote, a moral outrage and criminal act. After Ban Ki-moon, the US puppet finally spoke out. The puppeteer, the United States, was isolated. The entire world at this point was condemning Israel for its criminal assault on Gaza. Now Ban Ki-moon had joined the chorus of condemnation, and finally the Obama administration, isolated on the world stage, it announced that it was, quote, appalled by this disgraceful act. And then the game was up. You've lost the US, and so Netanyahu announced the ground invasion is over, and he withdrew the troops. And then the negotiations began to end the conflict. As it happened, they went on for 3 weeks, the negotiations, and a new opportunity arose for Netanyahu, because that's when the US reporter was beheaded by ISIS. The cameras shifted again, and then Israel carried on in what can only be described as a completely lunatic fashion. It was like a computer game, for those of you who remember. It just started targeting high-rises in Gaza, 60-story buildings, just as if we were playing a computer game, demolishing one after another, hoping to break the will of Hamas and the Palestinian people of Gaza, but unsuccessfully until the very last hour. Hamas kept firing no longer rockets, he no longer had any. It was firing mortar shells, and I think it killed 2 Israeli civilians, or one or two, in the last hour, and then it was over. Netanyahu, of course, announced it was a great military and political achievement, what he had done in Gaza. In fact, he achieved none of his avowed aims. The unity government, for what it's worth, it held together. Not only was the EU and the US negotiating with Hamas, but by the end, as many Israelis lamented, Israel was forced to negotiate with Hamas. It neither disabled the rockets nor all of the so-called terror tunnels, and it had not defeated Hamas. The only thing it did was it satiated, it satisfied the bloodlust of Israeli society, which enjoys the spectacle of the death and destruction that was inflicted on the people of Gaza. Many commentators will rub their hands in glee at the prospect that when the dust had settled and the Palestinians came out of their shelters, they would look around them and see that everything and everyone had been destroyed in the course of those 51 days. On the Hamas side, you cannot say that it was a victory, because Hamas declared as its first aim, to lift the immoral, inhuman, and illegal blockade of Gaza, and it failed in that goal. It is true that Israel was not able to inflict a military defeat on Gaza, but it's also true that Hamas was unable to inflict or to achieve a political victory. This was the third outbreak of hostilities since 2008. Each time the goal was the same, to lift that brutal blockade of Gaza, and each time it failed. So you can respect the resistance that was put up by the people of Gaza, and you can certainly be in awe of the will of the people of Gaza not to be defeated, but in terms of improving the daily life of the people of Gaza or achieving a political victory, I think you have to honestly say that the armed resistance strategy has not succeeded. And that leaves open the question, what can work? But since I've spoken longer than I expected, what I'm going to do is leave off there, and I'll take questions from the audience. How long did I speak?
Hour and a half.
Yeah, I realized it went on longer than I intended. Okay, we have not as significant, but we just have a time constraint. I have to be out of here at 8:30, and we're now at 6:30.
Yeah.
So we have plenty of time. My general rule is, since everybody in this room, as is usually the case, except for the famous crocodile tears, everybody in the room was extremely respectful and tolerant. I'd like to take questions first from dissenters. So if you feel strongly that something I said is so outrageous to the human sensibility, you should have the right to comment first. So would the dissenters like to raise their hand, and I guess there'll be a roving microphone?
Yeah, that's what you want.
So are there any dissenters in the room who would like to express his or her or their opinions? Oh, good. Thank you.
Before you talk, I just want to remind everybody, please don't take any pictures, no video, no audio recording. This whole event is being recorded by Students for Justice in Palestine, and pictures were taken and might still be taken by the UP, but otherwise, I'd like to ask that nobody else take pictures, video, or audio.
Hi, thanks for coming. Something that you said that really stuck with me, that I have an issue with, and I'm sure this is something that you've heard tons of times, is that to call the rockets coming into Israel as enhanced fireworks. I've been to Israel many times. This summer was the first time that I ever experienced running to bomb shelters because of the rockets. And I ran into bomb shelters like over 50 times. And the first time it was kind of traumatic because I had no idea like what those sounds were like, and I'd never seen a bomb before. And I was holding this 90-year-old woman who was crying because I was in a city that had seen lots of destruction. And it was kind of weird because the next day when I was in Tel Aviv hearing the sign, I found myself telling Israelis that they needed to run to the rocket shelter. And I heard so many bombs that summer and so many sirens that when I was in Europe, every time I would hear a chime at the train, it was like I had PTSD. I felt like for a second I was hearing those bombs. And I'm not denying or saying that either side is perfect or wrong in this situation, but you ended your speech in saying what we can't do, and you cannot continue calling rockets fireworks, because when you play the numbers game, which is what you did over and over, saying, how could so little casualties come out of so many rockets? Well, when you look at the amount of money in Israel that's invested into bomb shelters, the fact that the buildings are built so that they don't hurt in explosions, and for you to say that the Iron Dome is only 5 to 10% accurate, you were quoting that man from MIT. So the reason that there wasn't a lot of public infrastructure damage is because Iron Dome is only used when the rocket is going to a populated area. Like you said, these rockets are not very sophisticated, but they're not fireworks. These rockets are so unsophisticated, that a lot of them have actually landed in Gaza, never even made it into Israel, and you don't hear Hamas or the PA talking about the damage caused by their own rockets. So my point is that for him to say in good faith, as someone who has spent as much time in the Middle East as he has and has as much knowledge, to call these bombs enhanced fireworks is not only disrespectful to the people who are running in shelters this summer, but also to the people in Gaza who too reap damages from these not enhanced fireworks, but rockets.
Well, let's try to figure that out. How would it be the case if we're talking about a rocket as anybody would conceive intuitively? How would it be the case that 3,600 rockets caused, according to Israel, I'm using their figure, how did they cause $15 million in property damage? How could that be? You know this building here cost $15 million. How can that be? I'm just asking what seems, on the face of it, a perfectly commonsensical question. Now, when Theodore Postal was asked that question, he said, the reason there were so few civilian casualties has nothing to do with Iron Dome. It had to do with a sophisticated shelter system. He also said could only carry a payload of 20 to 40 pounds, he said. An ammo payload of 20 to 40 pounds. But even 3,600 rockets with a payload of 20 to 40 pounds would cause more than $15 million in property damage. Did you see the pictures? I did.
I was there.
Yeah, but I'm saying Israel, you couldn't have been everywhere. But Israel posted on the web.
I actually
was. No, okay. I don't want to quarrel with you, and I have no reason to doubt your testimony. And eyewitness testimony, in my opinion, is significant testimony. I don't trivialize it. It's significant testimony. But you also recognize that even Israel, which is a small country, you can't be everywhere, every place, every time. So Israel posted on the web, and you can go check yourself, the pictures of the damage that were caused by these rockets. I wish right now I would bring it right up on the screen. They showed about 2 buildings where there was what you might describe as significant damage. The rest were cars where a windshield was broken. That's it.
That's not what my newsfeed showed.
Wait. Listen, you can't change the official numbers. Israel said $15 million. That's the figure they gave. I quoted them. Now, you talk about your experience, and I'm not going to dispute or deny your experience. But remember what happened. Israel was making this hysteria about the rockets. But then they had a big problem. This thing was dragging on much longer than they expected. Operation Cast Lead in 2008-9, it lasted 22 days. Operation Pillar of Defense, it lasted a week in 2012. This thing kept going on. Well, what happened? When I tell you, you remember right away. Israel was getting a big hit on its tourism. Nobody wanted to come to Israel to vacation. So what happened? Michael Bloomberg went over. He was invited. And what did Bloomberg say? Everybody come to Israel, it's perfectly safe here. He says, it's wonderful. There's nothing to be afraid of. Oh, all this talk that they're targeting Tel Aviv airport, it's nonsense. So why aren't you outraged at what Bloomberg said? Did he make it all up? Did he make it all up? The moment Israel started to take a hit in the tourism, it completely dropped the Hamas rockets. And for anyone who remembers, it switched to terror tunnels. Because the Hamas rockets were now causing it problems. So they switched their propaganda output. By the middle, it was no longer Hamas rockets. I mean, Dershowitz didn't even write a book, Hamas rockets. They're terror tunnels. They invented something new to justify the attack. I simply presented to you the numbers. Now, it's true, I inferred a conclusion from the numbers, but I wouldn't call it a numbers game. I'm saying let's use the numbers and try to make sense of them. If you use Theodore Postel's figure, and you use the Israeli figure of $15 million, how do 3,600 rockets cause $15 million in property damage? Are all the buildings in Israel made of fortified steel? Is that credible? No concrete buildings in Israel? Yeah, that's what I would figure. That's exactly what I thought. And I asked myself, how can 3,600 rockets cause $15 million in property damage? In truth, on my block where I live at Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn, there are a lot of houses that cost $15 million. One house hit by a rocket and it would be over. Plus, as you know and I know, and I don't blame Israelis, they inflate the amount of damage so they can get, more money in insurance. So it's probably about $5 million in property damage. And it's true. Who doesn't do that? No, I don't do it because I don't own anything, but if I did, I probably would also. Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
I just want to add to what you said. So you're talking of these traumatic experiences that when you were in Israel. I was in Palestine this summer, and I'm from a really, really small city next to Ramallah. And every Friday, Israeli troops would come visit my city and throw these tiny smoke bombs which Fridays are it's like a very important day. We pray all day. It's dedicated to Muslims. And they threw smoke bombs to, I don't know what of course they have bad intentions for me, but I experienced a traumatic experience as well. I was outside with a few of my friends, and all of a sudden I couldn't breathe, my eyes were burning, my nose was burning, and we had to rush into the car and drive over. It took 15 minutes for me to calm down. And everyone's like, oh no, it's not a big deal, this is very minor. We receive it every Friday. And those are the minor things that happen in a small city like Silhouette. And then it's actually much more serious. So, I think he's using the term of fireworks because compared to Israeli bombs, they're just so much less than the Israeli bombs. So he's using it as fireworks because compared to Israeli bombs, it's just not even a comparison, really.
Well, what was dropped in Shujaya, they were using these mine busters. They destroyed the whole city. They just flattened it. I mean, it was really breathtaking to read the accounts of what happened in places like that. It was completely leveled. Not to mention, there's a new book that came out on Gaza. It's called Gaza in History. I guess it's Oxford University Press. In my opinion, it's not a great book. It's basically a political history, which is not much more, in my opinion, than a Wikipedia entry. But it got these really great reviews. I figured, okay, let me read it. And what was the most astonishing thing reading the book, it's just Gaza has come under so many of these lunatic operations. I don't think anyone could imagine, since 2000, in the last 14 years, there had to have been at least 10 operations. You don't even know their names anymore. Operation Summer Rains, Operation Winter Snow, Operation Halloween, Operation Easter Chocolate. It's like, you people are out of your mind. What are you doing to that place? What are you doing to these people? It's simply not to be believed what the people of Gaza have endured. Not to mention that 80% of them are refugees from 1948. Not to mention that 60% of them are under 16 years old. Not to mention the massacres that occurred, for example, in 1956, when Israel invaded Gaza, went into the refugee camps and killed several hundred people. And in 1970, when Sharon went in to widen the roads, Ariel Sharon, the defense minister at the time, or he was agricultural minister at the time, went in to widen the roads. What are you doing to the people of Gaza? It's completely, it's not just immoral, it's completely insane what's been done to those people. Frankly, I cannot fathom. I really can, and I've read a lot. But what's been done to that area, it defies belief. You know, I'm not a religious person. I'm an atheist. I've always been. I'm not about to change as I pray that I live forever. But God bless the people of Gaza. Really. They've gotten nothing. So if I'm wrong and there is a God, may God bless the people of Gaza.
Just one thing before I go to the next person. Try and keep them more questions than comments, just so that we don't have talking across the room.
Thank you. You know, you brought up all this thing about Iron Dome and you know, the weapons and what have you. The money for Iron Dome and the other weapons that go into Israel, I believe, comes from the United States. Okay, Israel would not exist, if I'm not mistaken. I asked this question, part of my question. Would Israel exist at all as the fourth largest military without the pouring in of billions of dollars, what is it, $10 million a day or more into Israel and into Egypt? And I would ask you to speak a little bit more about Egypt, which I understand now capital investors are looking at Egypt as the #1 investment country in the world now with Sisi in power. But I want to ask you to speak also a little bit more about the historical context. You, like all of us here, we want to see the end to the violence. It's a major project, but I've been studying the Ottoman Empire recently, World War I, the Ottoman Empire. And, you know, these commentators about what's going on with regards to ISIS and all this, I ask people who think that they know something about this, I say, do you know what the Sykes-Picot Agreement is? Because that's what these people are saying they don't recognize, is Sykes-Picot, which was the split up of the Ottoman Empire by Mark Sykes and his counterpart in France, and then, you know, the White Paper, the Balfour Declaration, and on we go. So this is all in a greater context of breaking up the Middle East into little potentate emirates with a European colony in the center. So this all seems to me to be about arms sales and the breaking up of the Middle East, with the exception of Israel, which is to be expanded as a European colony. And that ultimately, what drives this, why the ICC, why the governments, I don't think the people of the Middle East support Israel, it's the governments who are supporting Israel. This is all driven by arms sales, is it not? And can you speak about that? Arms sales, Egypt, and the historical context with regards to the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. Thank you.
Well, if my plane is delayed because New York blew up, then I'll have time to address all of those.
Just take
questions. I teach now a class in Turkey 1 week a month. I shuttle back and forth. Vice trained scholar background. I have to understand the depth of grievance that Palestinians in particular feel at the injustice that was inflicted on them. However, even knowing the historical context and the depth of the historical grievance, we have to aim at ending the conflict. We're not going to undo the effects of agreements that were entered into surreptitiously by the British and French during World War I. In part, it is true that ISIS has, for the first time, undone part of Sykes-Picot. It's drawing new borders. And most experts seem to think that ISIS will be around for probably at least 10 years. So there has been a change. But I don't think it's going to be in Israel-Palestine. There's a consensus in the international community on how to end the conflict. The consensus is there to be 2 states, an Israeli and a Palestinian state, on the 67 border, the June 1967 border, and some just resolution of the refugee question. I'm not about to try to reinvent the wheel. I've been with this thing for 32 years, and it's a very tough struggle. It's just very tough, because you have the might of the United States, and it's very, very, very tough to overcome that obstacle. And the United States, in my opinion, mostly because of the Israel lobby, the United States is backing Israel. That's a very tough boulder to move. And I don't see the point in trying to invent new solutions. The question is, how do you get the international public opinion and the opinion of many states in the world, overwhelmingly the opinion of states, which support those 2 states, how do you get them to budge the United States? Because the U.S. is the obstacle. I have my own opinion of how it can be done, possibly be done, but I am painfully aware of how tough it is. As I said, when you read these documents, you're kind of like a fly on the wall. I'm watching Carter negotiate. I'm watching Carter negotiate. Jimmy Carter, who was the president in 1977. He was a smart guy, very impressive in action, for sure. And the Israelis have their heels dug in. And he is really worried. He's worried about American Jewish opinion. He's worried by, it wasn't called back, yes, it actually was called back then. He's worried by what was called back then, now they use a euphemism, we say Israel lobby, but actually, if you read the documents, it's very forthrightly spoken as the Jewish lobby. And he is worried. It's very hard for him. The Israelis say, no, 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 we're not withdrawing from the territories of conquered in 1967, meaning the Egyptian Sinai, the Golan Heights, and the West Bank, and Gaza. We're not withdrawing. And it's just really tough to get them to budge. And if he doesn't get them to budge, there's not going to be a withdrawal. It's not easy. I still think the best hope is to try to mobilize public opinion around a solution which most people agree on, which is get Israel to withdraw from the occupied territories and for there to be a just resolution of the refugee question. That, I think, is the best hope, but I don't like to hold out false hopes for people. Even to achieve that minimum, it's a real battle. Personally, I think it can be won, but let's not kid ourselves that it's an easy battle. It's not.
Hi. First of all, you can say hi to Jimmy Carter and tell him that all good things must come to an end. About Israel, all good things will come to an end.
I think you're referring to Jimmy Carter, because he's 90 years old.
Not to worry. Not to worry. Second of all, what happened in Gaza was not a war, it was a slaughter. And I want to know what happened to the rules of the Geneva Convention. Whatever happened to those?
Well, you can ask what happened to the rules of Geneva Convention in Afghanistan, what happened to them in Iraq, what happened to them in Pakistan with the drone strikes, what happened to them in Yemen with the drone strikes. They don't apply to important people. The International Criminal Court, to date, every single indictment has been of Africans. Every single indictment of the International Criminal Court has been of Africans. That's why you have an African prosecutor. Yes.
Yugoslavia.
No, that wasn't the International Criminal Court. That was a special tribunal. The ICC, no, it's only Africans. See, only Africans can commit war crimes. Tony Blair, George Bush, Cheney, only Africans can commit war crimes. There are possibilities that because the International Criminal Court has turned into such a laughingstock, because of its incompetence and it's obviously being used by the Western powers for their interests, it's possible, and we're seeing it now, that they're so embarrassed that they're being forced now to take seriously the Gaza and the Palestinian initiative. Otherwise, they're going to look even worse if they ignore it. So there are possibilities, but I can't say I'm really optimistic, and I'll tell you why. Because it's one thing to win a victory, but then the question is, what do you do with the victory? What do I mean by that? In 2004, the Palestinians won a huge victory at the International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice declared that the wall Israel has been building in the occupied West Bank is illegal, that Israel has to dismantle the wall, it has to pay compensation, and that the international community has to make sure that the ICJ's opinion is enforced, the law is enforced. Okay? How many people in this room even know that? Raise your hand. And this is in a room of people who are committed, 5 people. The problem with our Palestinian Authority is it doesn't do anything with the victories. It got the victory, it took it, folded it up, put it in an envelope, put it in the drawer, and that's it. That's not the way politics works. Let me give you an example, which everybody in this room will understand immediately, because a lot of you have even seen the film Selma. How many of you have seen the film Selma? Okay, so you'll understand. In 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court, it delivers its famous ruling in Brown versus Board of Education and declares that segregation is illegal in public facilities, that segregation has to end. Now, what was the result of that? By 1960, we're talking about 6 years later, you know how many schools have been desegregated in the South? About 3%. You can't win if you're powerless with a paper victory. What desegregated the South was the mass nonviolent resistance of African Americans, the breathtakingly courageous resistance of African Americans. I mean, it's kind of unbelievable if you read the story. The courage of these people who were your age. I mean, the students here, they were 20 and 21 years old. And they were going into the most remote little towns in the deep, deep South, where everybody, the mayor, the police, everybody belonged to the Klan. And they would go in and knock on doors, we're signing you up to vote. Now, when you went into those villages, you didn't know if you were coming out. But that's what desegregated the South. They used the legal victory in the Supreme Court. They held it up and said, this is our legal right. But the legal right, in the absence of mass nonviolent resistance, would have and did get them nothing. No schools were desegregated because of Brown versus Board of Ed. The schools were desegregated because people used the legal victory and said, we have the right to desegregate. That's the law of the land. That's something the Palestinian so-called leadership will never do.
Well, can you imagine if the Palestinian leadership started tearing down the wall, what would happen?
Well, you see, there is where I disagree with you.
Heavy firebombs.
Okay, listen. I'm glad you asked that question because she said, I like to say she, your name?
Ida.
Ida said, can you imagine what would happen if the Palestinian Authority tried to tear down the wall? Now, as you know, I am not naive about what Israel does. I'm perfectly aware